Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Lambda School's free mini bootcamp course. I'll be your instructor. My name is Dan Frainer, and welcome back to the mini bootcamp course. This is lesson 2. We're going to be talking about HTML and CSS tonight. For those that are just joining us tonight, this is lesson 2, but no need to fret. We have lesson 1 up on our YouTube channel. Hang out with us here tonight. And then when we finish this lesson, you can go back and rewatch lesson 1, and you can catch up with us super quick. These are meant to be watched in order, but just hang out with us tonight and watch through the lesson 2 stuff, and we will, we'll work on all the assignments in our Slack channel together. But yeah, this is lesson 2 tonight. Lesson 2 of a 12 lesson mini bootcamp. This is put on for free by Lambda School. And this is going to be 12 lessons. It's 3 weeks long, 4 lessons a week, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And so last night we covered version control using Git and GitHub. Tonight we're going to be talking about HTML and CSS. This is put on by Lambda School for free of charge. This is this mini bootcamp course. And of course, those of you that have joined us last night, maybe you are familiar with Lambda School if you're just joining us tonight. But Lambda School is a computer science education school, and we offer a full 6-month computer science immersive called the Academy of Computer Science. And it is an immersive program that kind of goes through all of the tools necessary to become a software developer right out of school. And I'll be talking a bit more in depth about the exact curriculum in a future lesson. Tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit about our unique payment option, which is really cool and really unique to us here. We here at Lambda School truly believe that education and higher education, there should be no barriers to it, except for the fact that you're willing to put the hard work and effort into it. And so we're able to kind of de-risk that, and we're able to remove a major barrier to a lot of students, which is a financial barrier. Like I said, this mini bootcamp is free of charge, but our full program, obviously, there are costs associated with running a school, and we're able to offer something called an ISA, which is an income share agreement. And the income share agreement is saying, we say that you pay nothing upfront. You don't pay a deposit. You don't pay any money, whereas you can see that other online schools or any other kind of coding bootcamp style schools, they could ask for up to $20,000 up front. Where here we say, don't worry about that. Worry about focusing on the studies. Worry about doing well in the program and learning as much as you can, and then we'll talk about that once you are graduated. And so we don't ask for any sort of payment until you've graduated and you've gotten a job in the tech field. And so once you've gotten a job in the software field, making more than $50,000 a year, then we ask that you contribute back to us. So essentially, you're investing your time and energy and your brain into this for the 6 months, and we're investing the resources it costs to run a school, and we're investing in you. And so that gives us motivation to make sure that you are the best software engineer that you can be coming out of our school, and that you are job ready. If you're not job ready, you don't get a job, then we get nothing out of it. So it's really this win-win situation for the student and the school to get you ready for a career in software engineering. And once you get a job after graduation, then we ask for 15 or 17% of your yearly salary for 2 years. Up to $30,000. So if you get a job making $150,000 after school, then you'll eventually pay $30,000. If you get a job making $50,000 after school, you'll pay 17% of your income for 2 years, which would be 17,000 of all together after 2 years. So it's our job to make sure that you are ready for the field and ready to hop in as a professional software engineer. And it's really a cool, unique opportunity that we have to remove that barrier, that financial barrier that plagues so many students, and sets you up for success, and sets you up to not have to worry about finding a loan or saving money for the tuition or anything like that. Your main concern is focusing on school and focusing on this work. So that's what we call an income share agreement, and that allows us to operate without requiring anyone to put a deposit down or any sort of tuition up front. And that is a really unique part about our school and something I'm really happy and proud that we can offer. So getting on with our lesson tonight, once again, if you're joining us live, please join the questions channel on Slack, and where you can ask your questions as we go along, and I'll be able to read them and answer them as we go tonight. So let me share my screen. And we'll talk about kind of a little bit about what we talked about last night, kind of go over a little retrospective of what we did last night, and then we'll hop into our lesson tonight. So once again, if you have not created a GitHub account, please go to github.com and create a GitHub account, and then fork and clone the repo on your GitHub account. And then you'll have access to all of the lesson materials and all of the assignments. And when you clone it, it'll be on your computer. And you can see all of our lessons are broken up into individual lessons. Last night was Git. We talked about Git fundamentals. We talked about basic terminal commands using list, change directory, make directory, touch, remove. We learned about forking and cloning from GitHub, and then using Git to add changes to our Git history and then to save our Git history using add and commit. And then we also learned about pushing those changes up to github.com, and then submitting a pull request, which you'll need to do if you plan on applying for the full program here at Lambda School. This is considered your pre-course work. And so we do require you to have all of these assignments done before you start the class. That being said, please work on these assignments at your own pace. There is a lesson channel for each lesson where you can ask for specific help on that lesson in Slack, and work them on your own pace. If you are planning on starting, in April, it needs to be done before your start date or whenever you're planning on starting. Or if you're just joining along with us, don't worry about turning anything in. You can submit a pull request to get practice on it. Absolutely fun. So tonight, let's go and talk about what we're going to be covering tonight. So in this lesson, we are going to cover an introduction to HTML. We're going to talk about basic HTML elements, an introduction to CSS, CSS selectors and the style, HTML style element, basic CSS styling, quick introduction to the box model, and then how to use external style sheets in the link element. And let's start with tonight's lesson. So let me get this out of the way. I'm going to be using something called a code sandbox tonight. It's this program online. It's a web application called CodePen. CodePenIO.io is the name of the site. This I am using only to demonstrate the code and to show it to you live. When you are working on your assignment, you will not be using CodePenIO. you are going to be using your text editor that you've downloaded and it's installed on your computer, whether that be VS Code, Sublime Text, Atom, Brackets, Vim, Emacs, whatever text editor of your choice. That's what you're going to be using. And I'll show you at the end of the lesson tonight how to work it and how to kind of open your files and make changes, and then how to view them as well. So just know that when you see me working in CodePen.io here, it's just for reference purposes. It's just to show you this stuff live, because it's a really cool little program that allows you to play around with stuff, and then you can see a live output right here from it. So just a reminder, you will not be doing your lessons, your assignments in CodePen. You'll be doing them in VS Code, something like this, okay, which is a program that's on your computer. And we'll close that for a little bit, and then talk about some HTML here. So what is HTML? You might have heard of HTML. You might, have heard that HTML is the language used to build websites. And that's, pretty true. It's a core building block of the internet. I like to say that there's 3 building blocks of the internet, of just the basic stuff. And that's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML, by far, is the only thing you need to build a website. It's really the only thing you need to build a website. You have to have HTML. You don't have to have CSS or JavaScript, but you have to have HTML. Every single web page on the internet is made up of HTML in its most basic form. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So it's not a programming language, but instead it's what we call a markup language. And it's meant to be interpreted by web browsers, and the data is presented in a graphical form. What it is it's plans that we give a web browser to tell it how to build the web page we want to create, that we're creating. It's just a blueprint for the website that we're creating. That's what HTML is. We're going to learn about the basic HTML makeup of a web page tonight, and then we'll move into CSS and get a little bit of style on our website as well. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what we call HTML elements. So every element, HTML is a series of elements with information presented either between them or inside of them. Each element is contained in what we call brackets, and we'll refer to these, a set of these, as tags here, okay? And HTML will have a opening bracket, which is as you see there, that is one bracket, and it'll have a closing bracket, which is the same thing, but with a / in it that tells the web browser that the information that we're presenting is done. We're done telling it that instruction. Move on to the next one. And inside of both of them, we're going to have the name of the element. So we're going to tell the web browser what it is that we want it to display, how we want it to display. And there are dozens of HTML elements, and we'll talk about a few tonight. Everything from images to there's a paragraph tag. We'll talk about the paragraph tag. This is how we make our HTML tags and our elements. Okay, so this is our basic syntax here. We have an open tag and a closing tag, and we have the name of the element in it. Say it's an image. And the closing tag always has that / and the name of the tag after it. So we're telling the web browser, everything we're presenting from now on is going to be part of this image tag, and now stop interpreting it as an image, is what it's doing. So the first tag we're going to talk about is HTML. An HTML tag is the tag that is the element that's going to appear topmost in our HTML file. This is telling the web browser for sure all of the stuff that you're going to read from in between these two tags is HTML, and please interpret it as HTML. So all of the data, all of the other HTML we're going to have is going to be written in between these two tags. Okay, there shouldn't be any data. There's a couple of things, maybe if you get a little more advanced, something like doc type, that would be outside of it. But from now on, for our lesson, all of the HTML is going to be written in between these two tags. Okay, so that's our parent element, and that's what everything is going to go in. Inside of the HTML, the two tags that go inside of the HTML are head and body. Okay, so head is what we're going to talk about first. And head is going to give the browser data and elements that is going to allow the browser to load the web page the way we want it to happen. Most notably, we're going to have something in the head called a title tag. And if we give it a title, my web page. The title is what appears in your in that tab there. It's the title of the page. So anything in the head will not appear on the actual web page itself. This is all kind of metadata. This is all data that we want to set it up. So our title is actually going to appear right up here in the tab. And this being CodePen doesn't allow us to put a unique title, but that's where you would put your title at. Also, it's where we can inject dependencies for JavaScript and CSS, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, and we'll continue talking about how to bring JavaScript files in a couple of weeks from now. But that's our head, so that's all the data that we need to load the web page. Our body is where all of the stuff that we're going to see on our screen here is going to go. Okay. And you'll notice, actually, kind of an aside, pretty important for us as developers, how I'm indenting these these tags from each other. So we can see that HTML is our topmost tag, the head is the second tag down, and this allows us to quickly scan through a website and see or through our HTML and see where our tags are nested at, and because it's important to know the title goes inside of the head, right? So we know that that's inside of the head. Anything in the body is going to go inside of the body, and it is really important to yourself and to anyone reading your code to start getting the habit of indenting in like this, and it just makes reading your code so much easier. So inside of our body, we're going to have all of the elements that are displayed on the screen. And I'm going to go through a few of those elements right now. You've already seen me use the P. P stands for paragraph. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to just write text on the screen. It's going to have some unique properties that we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's a paragraph, essentially. When HTML specification was first written, it was written to create websites that looked like newspapers. And so we see a lot of these elements that kind of hark back to the layout of a newspaper. So a paragraph is one of them, right? So here is a paragraph. So we can see now there's just some text written on our web page, right? So all of this setup, and now we finally see something written on our screen. So here is a paragraph. Here's our first tag here, and that's just a P, right? The second tag I'll go over, it's called a span. A span is very similar to a paragraph tag, but let's show you something unique about paragraphs are that Paragraphs will always start on a new line. So there will always be a new line under it. Span, on the other hand, allows us to write text to the screen, but it's more of a generic text container. And span we can see here are spans. Here's our first span, and here's our next span. They appear on the same line. So spans are going to keep going on that same line, whereas paragraphs, no matter how much data there is, there could be a simple letter, right? And it's always going to appear on a new line, whereas the spans are always going to appear on the same line. And we will talk a little bit tomorrow about why that is. But just know that that's a unique property of paragraph and spans. Very similar to a span is something called a div. And a div is most notable for just being a very generic container that allows us to put other elements inside of it. A div is used primarily for styling purposes, and we're going to talk about styling later this evening. But just know that divs are just generic containers. They really don't have that much functionality to them. And we can put whatever we want. We can put spans and paragraphs inside of our divs. We can put images in them. But just know that it does exist. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. Let me get rid of a couple of things out here so our screen's not so cluttered. Our next element is going to be the anchor tag. So it's just an A, and our anchor tag is going to introduce us to something called an attribute. First of all, our anchor tag, what an anchor is a link. It's how we display links on a web page. So if I say, this takes you to Google, something like that. So this is going to be the link, and you see nothing is appearing on the screen. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so it takes you to Google. So now we're going to introduce you to an attribute, and it's going to be called href for this. And now we're going to tell the browser, okay, you've given us an anchor tag, you've given us some text. Now when they click on that, where do you want them to go? Let's go to google.com, right? Now you see we have a link on our page. We click on that, it opens it up, and there's Google for us. So we can, write whatever text we want here. This is a link, right? And that's what's going to appear. And then whatever you put in the href is where it will take the user when they click on the link. Okay, so that is an A tag. That's an anchor tag, which we can just assume is creating a link on the website. The next we're going to talk about is the H1 through H6. There's an H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, all the way to H6. And this stands for headline. Remember when I just talked about how HTML was originally written to format web pages in the format of a newspaper? Here you go. Here's your headline. And you'll notice some interesting stuff about them. Is that the H1 is going to be the largest headline. We can imagine the numbers to be levels of importance. So 1 is the most important, right? So that's going to be the largest. So that's going to be your main headline. We don't typically use these tags for font size any longer, but they are still very important for something called SEO. Which is something we touch on and talk about in our full program, but they are still important. But just know that they do exist, and the numbers coincide with the importance. So, you can have an H3 tag. You'll see H3 is less important than H1, but more important than H6. So that's why it's got that size on it. Just know that they do exist and what those numbers mean. we're going to talk about our image tag. And our image also takes an attribute, and this time our attribute is source, src, and this is telling the web browser where the image that we want, where the image file that we want lives. So I'm going to put in a generic image, lorem. And one thing we can notice about the image tag is that it's what we call self-closing. So we don't need, on some tags, there to be something like that on it, right? Image is one of them, and it's dependent on the element of whether it can be self-closing or not. There we go. Okay, popped open. If it can be self-closing, that means that we're not going to give it any data in between the two tags. There's nothing that we would give image. We just want to give it the path of the image that we want. So we can say, since there's no data in between the two tags, we're just going to close it right in that opening tag by including that / at the end after we've written everything in there. So that's our image tag, and that allows us to create an image and make it appear on the screen. And there you go. We have just an image that appears on the screen now for us. Finally, with our HTML, I'm going to talk about lists and what the UL and LI are. I'm actually going to get rid of that for a moment so that doesn't keep. Okay, so we have something called a UL tag, and this stands for unordered list. Okay, and an unordered list, and there is a such thing as an ordered list, and we'll see the difference between them right now. The element that goes along with UL is LI, and LI is going to be a list item. So first item. And we can have as many LIs in a UL as we want. Etc. Okay, and we can see that an unordered list gives us these bullet points here. And using CSS, we can make those different, or we can delete them all together. But this gives us an actual list here. And like I said, there can be an OL as well, and that's an ordered list. And now you'll see that they're numbered, right? And you can change those to Roman numerals, etc. But by far, the most common use of a list is the unordered list. And there we have it right there. So unordered list, and inside of the unordered list tags, we will need to include list items. Okay. And like I said, you can have as many of these in there as you want. So those are kind of a general introduction to some basic HTML tags. Right? We have our paragraph, which has its own kind of functionality, but allows us to create paragraphs on the screen. We have a span, which is a generic text container. We have a div, which is just a generic container altogether. We have an anchor tag, which allows us to create a link on the screen. Okay, and inside of that anchor tag, we have href, which is an attribute that tells us where it's going to go when that link is clicked, right? We have our H1 through H6, which are our headline tags. And we have our image as well, which I deleted, but in our image we learned is self-closing. Also, it takes an attribute called source, which is where the image lives. Okay, and you can go to Google and just look up an image, and this is very bad practice if you have a website on oops. if you have a website that you're actually showing to the public because you're stealing bandwidth, but if you just want to see an image appear on your screen, you can just grab the image. Oop, Wikipedia doesn't let us, so they have a an issue with it. But yeah, you can just grab an image, right? So there's your image, needs a source. Then we have our unordered list with our list items on here. And those are our list items. And that's HTML in a nutshell. That's really all the HTML you need to start get going. And this is fine. We have a bunch of text on the screen. We can throw an image up there, occasionally when we want. But it's pretty kind of boring, right? It's pretty plain. It looks like a really, really old website with nothing to it. And so that's where CSS comes in. HTML is great. HTML allows us to build this site, but alone it's plain and boring. This is the early days of the internet. Very basic text only with a couple of images here and there, web pages, right? Then along came CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And it's a way to put some color and style into our web pages. I always say it's like the difference between a black and white and a color TV. The difference between HTML with no CSS and HTML with CSS. You get your data, you get your information across with your HTML, but you want it to have a little bit of style. You want it to look good, right? And so there's the second part of our trio, which is HTML is first, CSS is second, and then JavaScript, which we'll talk about on Thursday, is third. So first things first, inside of our head, we can include a tag called the style tag. And inside of this style tag, we can write CSS in there. So what's happening here is our browser reads, okay, everything in here is HTML. Okay, everything in here is part of the head, so this will be loaded and not appear on the screen. There's the title. It goes in the tab. Here's style. Okay, so everything in between these two tags, don't think of it as HTML anymore, but think of it now as CSS. It'll get to that closed style tag, and it'll continue with the HTML, right? So our style rules go in here, inside the style tag, and we'll later show you how to put it in its own CSS file. So first things first, to understand CSS, we have to understand how we select elements on the screen to add style to. And so we can select all the elements of a certain type. We can say P, and this is going to select all the elements of a certain of the paragraph element type, right? That's the first way we can select elements. It's just tell all of the elements, and now any rules that we give it are going to be applied to every single paragraph element on the screen. We can also use something called classes and IDs. So we have to add those classes and IDs to the elements when we create them. So let's say we have this list item, and we're going to give it the ID of first item. So to add an ID or a class to an element, inside of the opening tag, we're going to say either, and we're going to give it an attribute. And the first one we're going to give this one is an ID. So IDs are unique to a single element on the page. You should not have multiple elements with the same ID. Another thing to use is a class. And classes can be on as many elements as you want. Okay, so we can have all of these have this class, a list item class. You can even have elements with an ID and a class. You can even have elements with multiple classes. And to add multiple classes, you just put a space and then write the next class next to it. Okay. So that's how we add IDs and classes to our HTML itself. So coming back up to our style, you see we have a p tag, and let's go back to that paragraph. How we write CSS is we give it the selector. In this case, we're going to select every single element of paragraph, and we give it these open and closing brackets here. So the open and closing brackets are where our style rules are going to appear. We can select all of the elements of a single type, or we can select classes or IDs. So first things first, let's talk about how to select an ID. We use the hash symbol, the pound sign, the number key, whatever you want to call it, to denote that we are selecting an ID. Okay, that hash symbol says this is going to be an ID. Please go look for this ID on your HTML. And let's say we have the ID of first item. And now that's going to allow us to add styling rules to that element with that ID on it. The other way, how we select classes, is we use a dot, a period. That's telling CSS, go and find every element with this class on it. And we're going to say list item class. Okay. And so those are the three ways that we select elements. We either give all of the elements an ID or a class of the elements. So now let's talk about some basic styling rules. To write style rules on here, we are going to give it the name of the styling rule. So let's say we're going to give this a color, and we'll go over all these rules in a little bit. So you give it the styling property name. We want to say we want to change the color, which is text color, on that paragraph element. And then you give it the value you want to change it to. So you say color, a colon, you have to have a colon, and then the value you want to change it to, and then a semicolon. This is required. This is how you have to change it. You have to have your colon, and you have to have your semicolon. You can probably do it without a semicolon there, but let's go. Now we'll see that nothing happens there. So you have to have a semicolon in order to separate your different styling rules. Okay, that's telling it that I'm going to change the color to red, stop. The next one, I'm going to change something to something, stop. Okay. So let's talk about how we can affect items on our screen. First of all, I want to give this item a border. So border is the first one we'll talk about, and I like to say border first because it kind of encapsulates the exact element we're talking about on the screen. In this case, it's going to be this one paragraph element, but this is all paragraph elements. Border is going to take three rules. It's going to take a width, I'll say 1 pixel, a style, I'll give it solid, and then a color, and I'm going to say black. Now we can see that our paragraph element has a border to it. And actually, let's do this. Give it a div, and we can see our div is kind of hidden in there, but we're going to give it some height and width on it as well. So talking about it, we can tell it how tall we want the item to be. And remember, this is a div. So this is just our generic container. And remember when I talked about how divs are mostly used for styling purposes? Let's give our div a height of 100 pixels and a width of 100 pixels. Now we see, and let's change that to blue, because that will change this to 3 pixels. So now we see that we have this box that's 100 pixels wide by 100 pixels tall with a border around it, a blue border around it. Okay, and we've just added that to the style here. So we have a height, a width, we have a border. We also have something called padding. So padding is a invisible margin inside of the border, but before your content. So let's go put this here inside of our div so we can see this in action. So here we see now that we have a div with a height and width of 100, and we have that paragraph tag inside of there. And we'll just say here instead of that whole thing. So padding is actually going to create an invisible margin inside of our border. So let's just say 25 pixels. And that's going to say 25 pixels on the top, the left, the bottom, and the right. On the other hand, we have margin. And margin is going to create an invisible buffer around the outside of the border. Okay? And we'll give that 50 pixels. Now we can see that there is this outside 50 pixel margin around the element. There's our border. There's a 25 pixel margin inside of the element, which is our padding. And then we have our content in here. And our content is that 100 by 100. Okay? And this is known as the box model. Inside of your notes, your class notes, there's an example, like a great printout of what the box model is and what it looks like. And there's a little bit of further reading for tonight inside of there on how to calculate the box model. A couple other things I want to talk about are, we've already seen first and foremost, color. And color is kind of is a tricky one because color is always referring to the color of the text inside of that element. Color is not referring to the background or anything like that. So just know that color is only referring to the text, and you can change the color to a different color, and you'll see that there it is. That color is now changed to red. On the other hand, we do have background color as well. Or we can just use background. And we can say, we want to change that to gray. And now we see that the background of this one div has changed to gray, and the color has changed to red. We also have font size. And this is measured in pixels. If you're not familiar with pixels, it's, most, word processing, like anything like Microsoft Word uses pixels for the font size. And so we'll give that 20 pixels. We'll give it more than that. So we want it to get big. There we see that the font size has gotten much bigger, right? So there are literally hundreds of styling rules that you can give to your CSS elements. And we didn't even affect any of those elements down there when we selected the first item or the list items class. This is something that you have to play around with a lot in order to get this, in order to really start to understand it. And it's something that we go really in depth in our full program at Lambda School. We have these awesome UI modules that we go really in depth into CSS and start building these beautiful CSS layouts. It's just something that you have to continue to play with a lot. One last thing before I open it up for a quick question session is the link element. So we have something in software development we like to call a separation of concerns. We have an HTML file. We want HTML to be in that file. We have a CSS file. We want CSS to be in that file. We don't really want to mix them together so much like this. So what we can do is in our head, give it something called the link element. And it is going to have a attribute called rel, which is going to be style sheet, because remember it's cascading style sheets. And the href is going to be where your style sheet exists. And on your assignment tonight, it's going to exist in the same exact folder, and it should be styles.css. And you give it that period and /. That means it's in the same exact folder that I'm currently in, and that's the name of the file. And then we can take the CSS that we have, we can remove it, and we can just add it to a CSS file. And now we'll see that it's come into our HTML file. So we'll see we only have HTML in the CSS file, and we only have CSS or HTML in the HTML file, and we only have CSS in the CSS file. And that is a part of the assignment tonight, and that's the last thing you'll do. So speaking of the assignment, let me open it up. And you are going to find your way to the Lesson 2 HTML CSS folder. So those of you that are totally new, let me restart this. You're going to open up your text editor. It's going to look something like this. If you have Visual Studio Code, VS Code, it's going to look like this. If you have something else, it's going to look different. But you're going to say File, Open. You'll find your pre-course folder, and you'll open the whole thing. Makes it easy. You will then find your Lesson 2 folder, open that, open the homework folder, and then you're going to have a homework.html file, which is going to be pretty much blank, where you're going to write all of your HTML, and then you'll have a Readme text, which is going to give you some instructions on how to write your HTML. So I want to say that it looks like there's a lot of stuff in here to do. It's really not that much stuff. There's just, give the ID a margin of 50, create, a body, create an H1 element, etc. So in your homework, go in. And get rid of that guy, get rid of that guy, get rid of those guys. You'll create this basic, and you don't even need this part yet. You'll create this basic HTML template, and we'll just say my website. You will file and save that. And if you have a editor that has inline, it allows you to preview the file, use that. Otherwise, go into your web browser, click File, Open, find your pre-course folder, Lesson 2, Homework, and then open that homework.html. And now you'll see I changed the title, and now look up there. My website is the title of the page. Okay, so let's go in here into the body and add an H1. Starting the assignment. I'll save it. Go into here, refresh, and now we'll see that all of our stuff is updating as we go. So that is going to be the assignment tonight, is to read through this readme.txt and work on each of these and, finish one, create a basic HTML, including head and body, add a title element, then go and open it up and see if your title element's displaying. Add in the body, create 3 divs. Okay. So go in, create 3 divs, and put stuff in it. And then just work through it like that. Like I said, if you have any questions whatsoever about any of the instructions in this file, go into CS Lesson 2 Slack channel and ask questions in there. We have some great TAs. I hang out in there. We have former students. We have current students that are, maybe have already done HTML before. You can help you out. It's a really great atmosphere and a great place to ask questions. And if you know a bit about it, hang out in there and answer some questions. But that is the assignment. And I say the assignment for tonight, but it's not the assignment for tonight. It's the assignment for this lesson. And we will move on to the next lesson tomorrow, but don't worry. If you don't have this complete by tomorrow, continue working on it at your own pace, in your own time. And then just work on it until it's done, and ask questions and ask for help. And we're all here to support each other and to get you through this. So that being said, let me open it up for questions now. If you have any questions, please post them in the questions channel on Slack. Where can I access the class notes he mentioned? So if you go to github.com/Lambda School, you'll see that this is something that we've already, as far as lesson 1 goes, we've already forked and cloned it. So if you open up your text editor, you'll see that you have access to all of the class notes already on your computer. Or you can go to GitHub, and you can even go to your own personal profile. And as long as you've forked it, then you can see that you hop into lesson 2. There you go. There's all the class notes. And these are the class notes for every single lesson on here. Lesson 7, not to scare you right now, so don't pay attention to what we're doing. You can see there's class notes for every single lesson on here. Just open the lesson file, and you'll see that there are class notes for it. And they're also on your computer as long as you've forked and cloned properly per last night's lesson. Does VS Code have a way to get the screen on the side that shows what is happening? VS Code does have it, but you have to go and download a dependency for it. VS Code is pretty powerful in its own way, but you can download these cool extensions, and I've used the live HTML previewer. So you can go download that if you want onto it. It's up to you, but VS Code doesn't have anything built into it. The best text editor with live preview is brackets. I'll just say that out loud. Is it better to use live preview, or is that bad practice? For right now, you can use live preview. That's fine. But as a professional web developer, you will always want to view your code in a browser. And that's only because you're developing for a browser. So you want to see how the browser affects your code and how it looks in a browser. So bad practice, for now, when you're just beginning and just learning, live preview is fine. But best practice, if there is such thing, is viewing the code inside of your browser. How often does the part-time bootcamp start? So the part-time, we do have an after-hours part-time class, which meets for 3 hours, Monday through Thursday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, and Monday through Thursday, 6 to 9 Pacific. And then it also meets on Saturday morning from 9 to noon Pacific. And that lasts for 12 months. And it starts every 6 months. So our next part-time program will be starting on the first Monday in July. I'm not sure the exact date, but it's the first Monday in July. If you are interested in signing up for the part-time July program, it's really popular. And start your application process as soon as possible. And because it does fill up, and the sooner you start your application process, the sooner you can secure a seat in that class. Your pre-course stuff does not have to be finished to start an application. The application and the first interview process is non-technical. So you can continue to work on your pre-course as you go through the application process. That's totally fine. Just get it started as soon as possible. if you're interested in that. And also, if you're interested in our April start date, please start your application ASAP. All right. Any more questions? Give a couple more minutes for questions tonight. I'll just say I did go over a lot of information tonight, right? There's a lot of information in this. And all of everything I talked about is outlined in the notes. So please go back and reference your notes. All these videos are recorded, so feel free to come back and reference the video. And then hop into the CS Lesson 2 channel, excuse me, and ask questions in there. There's also some great resources at the bottom of all of our class notes, so further reading that tells you a little bit more about what we've talked about. How deep do we teach HTML and CSS in the full-time program? HTML can get deep, but for the most part, HTML is kind of just the building blocks. CSS, we do get pretty deep in the full-time program. We have 2 UI sprints, and a sprint is a week for the full-time program, and that go pretty deep into responsive CSS. We actually touch on preprocessors. We use less, and we talk about building actual user interfaces in CSS. So we do get pretty deep in the full program. Yep. So once more before I go, I'll show you how to open your file that you're working on, right? You have your homework.html file, and it's in your lesson 2 folder, in the homework folder inside of that, homework.html. So when you go into your browser, I use Chrome. If you're using another browser, it might be slightly different, and it will be different a little bit on a Windows computer as well. But essentially, you're going to click File, and you're going to Open File. You make your way, let's just go in all the way. You find your pre-course folder, there it is. You find lesson 2, there it is. You go into homework, homework.html, and you open that, and there's your file right there. If you have any questions about any of the assignments, don't use the questions channel. The questions channel is really only for questions live as we're talking about it. Use the lessons channel. And so tonight's is, I've just posted it in, posted the lesson for tonight, the channel that you'll want to click on and go into for tonight if you have questions about this lesson. And then there's a lesson channel for every lesson. Lambda people are checking it, not occasionally, but regularly. So we are there to answer your questions. But please post all your questions in those lesson channels. This questions channel is only for the live video. So just make sure you understand that. Go into those lesson channels. Okay, that's all the time I have for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for lesson 2. We're finally starting to build stuff and see stuff on the screen, and it's really exciting. And I can't wait to continue further on down this path and start getting, tomorrow night we're going to talk about a little bit of intermediate CSS, and we'll start moving things around the screen and getting things to look cool in the way we want them to look. I hope you'll join me tomorrow night. We're going to just continue on and continue moving through this. Like I said, if you don't finish the assignment, no worries about that. Just come back and join us and work on the assignments at your own pace, because this stuff is really cool and you'll want to know it. And this is the ability for you to ask live questions as well. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you guys tomorrow night at 5 p.m. Pacific. We'll see you then.